Welcome to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where we discuss relevant information concerning the cybersecurity workforce, business development, and best practices, made possible by CMIS. Learn more at cmis.net. And for a list of authorized publications, visit DwayneHart.com. And now, here's your host, Dwayne Hart.
All right, Rich Casanova here, joined alongside Dwayne Hart, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 9 of the Cybersecurity Podcast. This is actually a two-part series on cybersecurity leadership. In this episode, we're going to be discussing, among many other topics, how to improve your understanding of cybersecurity leadership, the importance of understanding your job description, how to communicate effectively with your team and supervisors, strategies for managing your workload and prioritizing tasks, and finally, tips for continuous learning and professional development. And now, let me introduce the man of the hour, who is not only the podcast host of this show, but is also a best-selling author of the book Cybersecurity Mindset, YouTube creator, and all that content and more can be found at DwayneHart.com. In addition, he served 20 years in the Navy, and he's also a founder of a cybersecurity consulting firm and sought-after speaker, Mr. Dwayne Hart. So, Dwayne, today's episode is all about cybersecurity leadership, role, and responsibilities. Why is this so important, and why now?
Well, it's important because cybersecurity has itself two different folds to itself. One is that you need someone with the technical knowledge to drive cybersecurity programs. The second part is that you need a business champion, because the business champion are the individuals that speak to the C-suite professionals and sell cybersecurity. Now, what is so important about cybersecurity leadership is that there needs to be direction. When we look at the number of attacks that happened over the past couple of months and all the incidents that happened, someone has to take lead, and someone has to have that governance mindset. Governance is for oversight, because if you don't have oversight, what you have is ad hoc environments where people are performing very chaotic, and you don't want that to happen. So you need structure. And also, I can contest to that because I came from a leadership background, been in military for 20 years, and knowing that when leadership fails, the ship fails, the mission fails. So to sum it up, we need cybersecurity leadership because there has to be some form of direction, and there has to be someone that can communicate cybersecurity to C-suite professionals and other personnel that need to understand cybersecurity, because those are the personnel that are spending the money and the budget. So you need strong leadership in place to represent cybersecurity.
Yeah, well said. I love that term, business champion. And as you were talking, it kind of just struck a chord in terms of your background. You're 20 years in the Navy. I've never served in the military, but I understand the gist of the premise of having the right navigation for that ship and knowing your destination, but also navigating some dangerous waters, right? So, and in these days, any organization, if you don't have somebody at the helm in a leadership role that's strong, that is, understands, strategy and also defense strategy of these hackers, right? Because they're out there, and if they're not somebody's not at the helm, that can go sideways really quick, right?
Yes, because you just made a sound statement. So I could take that sound statement when it comes to defense, and I could carry that and talk about it for like an hour. But I'm going to make it simple. One of the things that I've always thought about was that cybersecurity and combat defense are like best friends. So that's a term we use in cybersecurity called cyber warfare, and then also in the military it's called combat warfare. Both of those are best friends because they carry the same concept when it comes to risk, right? Because you have to evaluate the enemy and you do your analysis of the enemy so you can make a determination on how to strategize. One of the things that I've always said when it comes to cybersecurity leadership, no one is born overnight to become a leader. Leadership happens through practical experience because every leader that is leading a cybersecurity program has background in some capacity of technology and business. And see, this is one of the major disconnection when it comes to cybersecurity leadership because the focus has always been put towards technology and just trying to drive technology. But a cybersecurity leader has to be a business champion as well because your job is to sell cybersecurity to the board because the board members are sitting there and stating, hey, we are all C-suite professionals. We want to know how this cybersecurity program is operating. Can you as a cybersecurity leader sell that pitch to the board? Because that's your role is to sell that pitch to the board. But in order to sell that pitch to the board, there is a series of things that need to occur. One is that you have to understand your environment. Because if you don't understand your cybersecurity landscape, you're setting yourself up for failure. Things like situational awareness is very important because my current Forbes article that should be out in a couple of weeks is really going to demonstrate how to take cybersecurity leadership and cyber protection and merge them together. And this is something that cyber leaders have to do. Also, too, I actually want to say that when it comes to cybersecurity leadership, people are your strongest assets that you have. And because you have to get a buy-in from people.
Right.
Even if we take cybersecurity out the picture, and let's just focus on leadership, period, right? It's the same concept. The only difference is that we are putting a cybersecurity perspective into this discussion because leadership itself has certain type of foundational practices. One of the things that I learned when I was in the military is that when you look at terms like responsibility, authority, and accountability, those are your foundational practices to leadership. So when I think about RAA and I bring that into this perspective when it comes to cybersecurity leadership, a cybersecurity leader has to be responsible, okay? And you're responsible because you're a risk manager too. And you have to take authority over that environment. Because when you take authority over the environment, then you can make decisions and you can give answers. And last, when it comes to accountability, that is one of the things that I've always stated that there needs to be that ownership mindset because that's where responsibility, that's where your accountability comes in because you're held accountable for a system with about 50 million assets. You can't shift the blame to nobody else. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. That definitely sets the foundation. And we should have mentioned in your introduction, amongst your many other accolades, you're also a Forbes contributor. And speaking of articles pertinent to this topic, talk to me about the article you wrote for Forbes talking about developing a cybersecurity focused culture. Because that's really kind of the foundation, right? And so we're talking about strategies and tactics and pitching to the board and so forth and establishing yourself as a leader. But let's rewind for a second and talk about, these foundation principles of this cybersecurity focused culture and through cybersecurity leadership.
Well, Rich, I went ahead of myself a little bit and I started to talk about RAA, which is that responsibility, authority, and accountability. Because when I was in the military, I used to teach leadership for my last couple of years. And this was one of the topics that were taught every day, RAA. And we drilled that into sailors. And now that I work in the cybersecurity industry, I see ways to use RAA. So when I wrote the recent Forbes article, I wanted to focus on how do you build a cyber-focused culture through leadership. Now, a cyber-focused culture means that you have people that are tuned in and want to be a part of cybersecurity But you know what? Let's just make it simple. You have people that wants to put on their hacker's hat.
Right.
And also, too, part of the article, I focus on situational awareness, because situational awareness is very important, because as a leader, you need to understand your environment. What are your defenses that you have in place? What are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? Because you're going to be challenged to make decisions. And some of those decisions that you make are based on information that is given to you. So a lot of times as a leader, when you first come on to an environment, that's your job, is to learn the environment, learn the people, learn the board, learn the system, and learn some of the defenses that you have, and also to the weaknesses that you have as well, too, because that's how you increase your capabilities. Because you cannot defend an enterprise if you have too many weaknesses, right, and a lower level of strength. So in this article, I always do a comparison between your capabilities, your weaknesses, and your strength. This is what guides cybersecurity leadership into understanding how to make those decisions, because a lot of times you're going to be challenged to make decisions on a quick notice. But if you don't understand the environment and you don't understand the culture and the people and the board, then you could set yourself up for failure. And that's not something we want to happen, because our job is to beat hackers to the finish line, but we can't beat them to the finish line if personnel are making bad decisions.
Right. Obviously, again, once again, well said. So, for our listeners, want to give you kind of a point of reference in your book, Cybersecurity Mindset. Much of this is covered in Chapter 2 under the Growth Mindset Culture. And also, you mentioned the Hacker's Hat, which is one of my favorite chapters, Chapter 19. Let's pivot for a second, right? Talk about also in Chapter 20 was talking about adapting the mindset. So you talked about situational awareness. Talk to us about how important communication is within that organization. You mentioned kind of pitching to the board and getting them on board with you, so to speak, right? But what about within the organization? Managers, supervisors, frontline employees. You talk about from the top, down, that communication to kind of get them, to collaborate amongst each other. And then finally, we either incorporate that, or the next point I think we talked about is adaptability. Once you've established those lines of communication, talk about adapting. Given back to the naval reference. You may have your ship set on a certain course, but if a storm, you can't predict storms, but you can be aware of those, right? And as those approach, you have to be able to pivot, much like these hackers now are, they're trying to stay one step ahead of the next guys. So talk to us about that in terms of adaptability and communication.
Well, communicate early and communicate often. I always like to make that statement there because your team looks at you. Whatever you state to your team makes a difference on whether they buy in to the program. Because that's the ultimate way that cybersecurity leadership will be able to be successful. If you have a buy-in from your team. Now, your team would buy in based on your communication strategy, because you have groups of people that are very forcing, and you have leaders that are not that sociable, and you have leaders that are very friendly. Now, how a person decides to lead their team is clearly up to them. But at the end of the day, are you successful? I actually learned that you can be a forcing person if you want to, and you can be a friendly person. But is it driving results? Are you keeping hackers away? Are you keeping the board happy? Are you a great communicator to the board? Because if the board don't trust you, you can't get the budget and you can't get help, because that can be a strong bottleneck for you right there. If you have board members that don't communicate to you and you don't have a great relationship with that board. Now, going on to the adaptability side of the house is that IT environments change a lot. When I wrote chapter 20 20 of the cybersecurity mindset, I thought about how an environment changed, because chapter 20 is about everything else that should occur on a daily basis. And you as a person that is trying to adapt to change, because having that adaptive mindset, meaning that when there's change, you can adapt and you can transform. So that really takes us into a term that we use in cybersecurity a lot called operational resilience. Can you bounce back?
Operational what?
Operational resilience is the term. Okay. So when we have operational resilience, we can bounce back through changes. We can make decisions when changes occur, and we still can have an operative environment. When I was in the military, we use operational resilience a lot because there was a lot of redundancy in place. Mm-hmm. So when one system went down, or if another person could not do the job, then, that was backup. So when we look at the cyber world, as a cyber leader, you definitely have to have that adaptive mindset because these environments change on a daily notice. There are things that come down from the board on a daily basis who's saying that we want to take certain system offline. We want to put X, Y, and Z system online. But you need to understand that environment and know how those changes will affect your environment, because you have to be able to communicate that to those board members. And
absolutely.
And that's where you come in as a business champion and knowing exactly how to communicate to the board. But if you don't understand the board members, then you can't communicate to them. And secondly, as a risk manager, you should be able to communicate that to your team, but you have to know your team members as well too, and to gain that trust, because that's most important. When you have team members.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just got a few minutes left in this episode, but stay tuned. We got a part 2 of this 2-part series coming up here soon. But so Dwayne, our last topic here before we kind of let you go is talk to us about these strategies for managing your workload, and how do you prioritize tasks? How do you structure? Because you got a lot of spinning plates, you got a lot of things on your radar, so to speak, you got to keep aware of. So what are some for our listeners, what would you leave them with in terms of some strategies for managing their workload and organizing their tasks?
Okay. Number one, you have to be proactive, because you don't want to try to manage your workload from the rear and try to be a responsive person, right? So because we know that cybersecurity environment changes every day, and there are different type of working requirements that are added on every day. If you get behind, guess what? It is stressful to catch up. So what you have to do is that you have to plan ahead. All right. Now we realize that changes come up, but if you plan ahead, you can defeat a lot of changes. Second is that people. Understand your people, because your people are very important, because you have to have people on board. Because if people are not operating and doing exactly what they're supposed to do, then, you're going to have failures. This is the reason why you communicate early and you communicate often, so that you can gain the trust of your people. And people will follow what I call the extrinsic motivation certain times, and then also too, there can be intrinsic motivational factors. So the extrinsic is knowing that they're going to get a reward by doing the job. So when it comes to intrinsic, which is a better way to operate with people, see, they carry their own motivational factors from the inside, because it is internal. So they want to do it because they want the IT environment to look good. And also too, they want you to succeed as a leader. So you have to practice those, but you have to be careful about those, because you don't want to fall into the extrinsic motivation all the time, because someone always wants you to give them something in order to do the job.
Right.
So I would say, go ahead.
No, finish your thought, and then we'll close things out. Yeah.
Yeah. So also too, I want to say that the third level, if you want to succeed, is that focus on cyber visibility. And I use that term a lot because that is based on the business level, because you as a business champion, when you understand cyber visibility, you know your defenses and you know your weaknesses and you know your capabilities and you know how the environment is operating, because you can't make a decision if you don't know how the environment operates. See, it's just like walking into a brand new environment and making a decision without all your data points. Well, you're setting yourself up for failure. So as a leader, you have to know that environment because you're going to communicate that environment to the board members, because that's going to be a time when you have to develop your cyber protection plan and give it to the board. And, the board is going to ask you questions. So you need to understand the environment and also wear those two hats I was talking about. One is the business champion and one is the risk manager.
So as we close things out, a couple of thoughts come to my mind. I'm just envisioning this theme you mentioned about business champion. I feel like I'd be a superhero. I need like the superhero outfit. I'd be wearing my hacker's hat along with my business champion, superpower costume. But so well said. And I think, to somewhat summarize, especially you closed out really, really well with those points about it really circles back to this foundation of establishing that culture. And if people feel within an organization that they're part of a team, you don't always have to motivate and encourage them because they feel like we're all in this together and we have a uniform goal, and and they feel ownership of the process and also the results.
Right.
All right. So let me close things out. And again, we have another a second part coming up here in episode 10 of season 4, continuing the conversation about cybersecurity leadership. So that'll be very compelling. So tune into that one. Again, signing off on behalf of Mr. Dwayne Hart, Rich Casanova. Once again, you can find this content on his YouTube channel, his book, The Cybersecurity Mindset, his information about being a speaker at your event and so forth. All that can be found at DwayneHart.com. Until next episode, Rich Casanova, Dwayne Hart. We'll see you next time.
All right. Take care.
You've been listening to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where you have gained relevant knowledge to enhance your cybersecurity mindset. Be sure to visit DwayneHart.com to learn more about authored publications, show notes, and discover more information concerning cybersecurity.